like to call to order the January 16th Select Board meeting to order. Announcements.
I believe we just have the one announcement that town offices will be closed this coming Monday, January 21st, in observance of Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Thank you, Libby. Is there any public comment here tonight that's not on the agenda? Okay. New business, the only thing we don't... Oh, sorry. Oh, thanks for that.
Sorry, Tobias Glidden, 24 Rugged Road. I just wanted to follow up on kind of our conversation from last week regarding green communities. I spoke with one or two members of the board regarding funding for that warrant article, and some of the feedback I got was to kind of wait until town meeting floor and try to make an allocation out of free cash, and I just wanted to say I'm more than happy to go forward with that. I've also spoken with Lauren Sinatra, our energy coordinator, about getting a presentation in front of the board with Seth Pickering, who is the regional coordinator for the Green Communities legislation. So hopefully sometime in February he'll have an opportunity to come to the board and give you some little more information. So I just want to give you a little update on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. Any other public comment that's not on the agenda? I'll wait for a second and scan. Okay. New business, only difference, we're going to take off the approval of the minutes coming up. So moving on to that, can I have approval of payroll warrants and treasury warrants?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye. Second.
Aye. Oh, yeah. Did I miss a second? Sorry.
Well, yeah. It's,
So you take a
we got
week
it
off.
covered.
You
We
get a
got
little
it
rusty. All those in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those pass. Pending contracts, Libby, anything?
I don't think there's anything controversial.
Make a motion that we approve a pending contracts.
Second.
Contracts.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. Town managers report.
So the first item here is a review of the warrant and where we are with it. In your packet, which was updated yesterday, is an outline, which is an updated outline from your meeting last week. So I want to bring your attention to the items here. Last week when we were so there's this first section about outstanding items for the board's determination and or review. Last week we were talking about the Milestone or Old South Road transportation improvement projects. So to recap, we had articles, 2 of them, on last year's annual town meeting warrant, which passed at town meeting, did not pass at the ballot. They were consolidated, put back on for the special town meeting in October. And we did not have a quorum at the special town meeting, although there was a ballot question, but the outcome of that didn't matter because we needed a warrant town meeting vote. So since last week, is Mike here? Burns? Rob, thank you. Is Mike Burns here? Oh, he's not coming? Okay. Well, anyway, Mike and I and Rob and Andrew have talked a bit about this. There was a bit of discussion about whether or not there should be a town admin recommendation on this. So I think there's a map. Is there a map, Greg, that you can possibly get to on this? Our recommendation essentially is that we seek an appropriation, which would be through a debt exclusion, for a roundabout at the Old South and Fairgrounds intersection, which is actually a project that's been talked about well before last year. It's been talked about since really the discussion of this building, the public safety building, was getting realistic in around 2009, 10, 11, that area, that time frame. And so our recommendation is that roundabout with the associated improvements on bike path, in particular on Fairgrounds up to Newtown Road, improvements Newtown Fairgrounds along Newtown from Fairgrounds to Hooper Farm, including a multi-use path and or sidewalk, however it works out, and there may be some other improvements on that road, and then bike paths on the other side of the street on Old South between Amelia and the Rotary, and that we also would have an article on the warrant that would seek to confirm local support for state funding for Milestone Rotary improvements, which ultimately our hope is that would be funded through state funds, but the state will seek a local vote supporting that ask. So Hopefully Rob can answer any technical questions about the specific project, but that would be our recommendation.
Tom?
So we do it as 2 articles.
We would do it as 2 articles, the appropriation being associated with the roundabout at Fairgrounds and Old South, but there would not be an appropriation associated with the other.
I appreciate the recommendation. I would support the 2 articles.
I'd like to make one comment. I had a conversation with someone yesterday and said, well, what? You're not listening to the voters. This has failed twice. And I think that's a legitimate question. But I think we've scaled it back and we have listened, but we're also trying to connect it to the strategic plan to get people out of their cars, single-use automobile rides. So I see this as a connector. Newtown Road and the Rotary to Fairgrounds is a connector from not just improving Milestone Rotary, but it's around that significant surrounding area, and then connecting that with another capital project we'll talk about in a second of getting people on bikes from the Rotary safely to downtown. So it makes sense for the strategic plan. That was my answer to, why are you keep going forward with this? And we have scaled it back from 2 years ago quite a bit.
We also have received approvals in the past for the design funds for the roundabout at Old South and Fairgrounds. So there is some expression of public support for
Right.
the project.
It was voted at town meeting. It failed at the
And
ballot.
Right.
And
That's
the
true,
last
too.
town meeting, there was no quorum.
Yep.
So,
And at the ballot,
the ballot question is problematic because people don't understand it who didn't come to town meeting. But I think it's really timely to think about the roundabout at the end of Fairgrounds with the fire station moving here imminently and having the proper road improvements for traffic flow.
I've been on NPDC. I support it, lukewarm, mainly because of the bike stuff. Until it's modeled, I'm not sure how effective it will be. If we keep adding 200 cars a year peak season, where are they going to go? And I'm going to talk about. I'll get my gondola speech tonight at the end, but I just where do the cars go? And sort of when you go down, you go to Telluride or Aspen, they have these things outside of town, and the town is a town with a grid pattern, and it's a town. This is an urban area, and so I wonder, are we moving them more quickly just to back them up somewhere else? So this, we'll try it and we'll spend a lot of money, but if we keep adding 200 cars a year peak season and don't dampen that somehow, getting people to do other things willingly or some other way, I don't know where we'll be 15, 20 years from now. I think we'll be in 2 hours of gridlock a good part of the summer.
Jim?
I guess we've spent some amount of time talking about the improvements to Old South Road. It's certainly a topic for any kind of discussion. We talk about traffic. It's certainly a topic when our visitors come in the summer. It's just getting worse every year. I've heard some negative comments about the Fairgrounds Rotary, and I'm not a transportation person, but it just doesn't make sense to improve the Milestone Rotary, improve Old South Road, and not doing something in the middle. So I think it's a good idea. I also appreciate the thoughtfulness about improving Newtown, recognizing that has become a thoroughfare, and I know that people in that neighborhood, many of them will appreciate that. So I'm very much in favor of it.
I'm very lukewarm about anything above and beyond the Milestone Rotary, and I think we've got the state funding. I'd be a little bit concerned by having 2 articles on there. I just would worry that it would threaten the Milestone one getting passed, because I think that's the most important one. I will probably support the recommendation because I do think that I'm not entirely sure that we are solving traffic issues, but I do think that with the Newtown connection, eventually 6 Fairgrounds, the fire station, I think the Fairgrounds intersection is very dangerous for cyclists. And I think the goal here is above and beyond the traffic issues, because if we keep adding cars, we don't have the ability to accommodate them, but we do need to make things safer for pedestrians and cyclists. And I think that it makes sense to look at this space. These two intersections are connected. So I'm lukewarm okay with it. I'm concerned about neither passing.
I always like to clarify on roundabouts. They don't put cars through faster. They put them through more cars through in a set amount of time, so it's safer and more efficient.
safer.
It's not when you say quicker and faster. Sometimes you just imagine people flying through there. And also, I'm going to echo kind of what you guys were saying with the sidewalk on Newtown, whether it's a multi-use path or a sidewalk, and then on the Inky Mirror side, having a sidewalk and a walking path on that side. So it's a bigger package, not just a roundabout. So I'm in favor of it.
No, and those are the reasons that I'm going to support it. But again, I'd love to see it modeled. It's faster, more efficiently, however you use it. However we say it, those cars are going to be getting somewhere else, Five Corners or, Caton Circle or somewhere else a little more quickly, because they're going through here more efficiently. We wouldn't be doing this if it didn't push, a few more, on paper, didn't push a few more cars through more easily. We wouldn't be doing it. If we were adding this to, to slow traffic down and have fewer cars go through, people would be in an uproar. And they, so just it's sort of semantics, but it's not. These are to be more efficient. That's the goal of it, and that's the. But when they studied it, they studied this corridor and they studied out to Nobody Farm. They did that route. They didn't study the downstream impacts on other areas. They didn't look at Washington Street or Five Corners or any of those areas. So they looked at just that specific area with existing counts. So.
I have trouble with that argument because the cars are all going different places. Maybe a chunk of them are like all heading to the ferry at one time, and that could cause an additional backup, but it's going to happen anyway. But some of these cars coming from here are going out to the airport, or going to Sconset, or going to town, or going to Nantucket that are coming through this section. But I think that the sidewalk improvements are critical. There are businesses all along this road, and it's horrible seeing people walk along there right now. And I think the roundabout is critical to the flow with public safety vehicles coming out of there.
I'm voting for this purely, or supporting it purely for safety issues. I would agree with you, Matt, that I'm not. I don't think we really know what the downstream impact will be of these in terms of building up other intersections. But again, if we don't get more people out of cars, then we will never be able to solve these. No road improvements, unless we make them 3-lane highways, are going to do it. So I'm only supporting this for the improvement to safety.
Mr. Chairman.
The argument that really convinced me, and I'm all about for safety too, because I don't know if this speeds up, brings more cars through. I don't know if having a rotary will bring 500 more cars here in the summertime. I don't know that. But if when we had a consultant come the first time, she took us through an exercise where she said, envision yourself at Five Corners and you're trying to make a turn right, and just go through the process of looking at each of the stop signs and each of the locations cars are, and then you pull out. But by the time you're there's 3 other things could have happened, and it makes it very unsafe. Especially, and then you add in pedestrians who are walking through the a traffic area. It's just a very unsafe situation that I'm convinced the rotary will improve dramatically.
I just want to mention that in response to the modeling issue, you'll learn more about this next week when Capital Program comes in with their report, but we do have an item in there for modeling in capital.
And that would be great, because that does answer, and you could say, what if we open up this road? What if we open up that road? What if we do this? What's the impact everywhere else? Then we would have and this happened in the comp plan days. And the recommendation, the warning was that we were going to be in the situation, when we hit 25,000 cars, we were going to be in gridlock in these areas. And back then, everyone said that will never happen. We'll never have 25,000 cars. Matt, you're being, you're crazy. What are you thinking that far ahead? It's never going to happen. And here it did. And now that it's happened, everyone's all upset about it. So I think it's important to have someone here that's actually, or have the software here to actually know what we have to do to really make it better. So anyway.
Rob, is there anything you wanted to add?
I just wanted to clarify, the milestone funding is intended to be funded by the state, if I believe. So
Yeah.
to your point, Rita, the two articles, one would be a locally funded improvement project here. The milestone is basically to petition the state to fix or improve Milestone Rotary. And just to Matt's point about the modeling, certainly we do need modeling. However, I think we could point to something Don said, as we're not, unless we're talking about a focused event like a boat trip or something like that, that people are trying to get to. Once you process people more efficiently through a location, they disperse when they are going to their own individual location. And one example we can point to is the distribution of traffic through the solid waste recycling facility with the improvements we've made there for circulation. All the traffic is taken off the road on the inbound, and then it's more dispersed on the outbound. So you don't have backups necessarily that take place. And on the receiving end, which is probably 95% of that traffic is going through Caton Circle on the outbound movement, and we don't see that attributed backup on the other end. So my point to that is, yes, modeling is certainly helpful to make some of these bigger decisions down the road, but I certainly wouldn't wait until we invested the time and effort to model the entire island to make transportation improvements.
No, and again, I'm not asking for that, but if I don't say this, we'll be here in 5 years having the same argument. This is my opportunity to put pressure on to do that. And that's why I take this opportunity to be a bit of a squeaky wheel on these things. So anyway.
I do think that everyone on this board, as far as I can tell, is on the same page in terms of getting people out of their cars as much as possible. That's why we instituted year-round bus service. That's why we're doing more bike path improvements. That's why it's part of our strategic plan.
Right. Yeah.
So I just think that this is in conjunction with many other efforts to eliminate or reduce our traffic problem.
Yeah, as far as I know, our strategic plan is the first time this body has taken action to support a numeric reduction in the number of cars on the island.
Yeah.
So
Single
that's-
use.
Single
automobile
use,
rights,
yeah. So that was pretty dramatic.
Yep.
One last thing, March 7th, we're holding a public information session on Amelia Drive to discuss one-way, two-way, different parking schematics, that sort of thing. And that would be directly impacted by this whole project here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Move on.
So so that we'll go on the record, I would make a motion that this board adopt the recommendation from town administration to add these two articles for the Milestone Road and Old South Road improvements to the 2019 annual town meeting.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Libby.
Thank you. The next item is the short-term rental bill. You had some discussion about this last week, and I think we were hoping to learn a little bit more information about the Cape and Islands Water Protection Trust Fund, which I'm not sure we learned a whole lot more. John and I and Greg attended Cape Cod Managers meeting at the end of last week, where several representatives from the Department of Revenue were present, and even they could not answer with definitiveness our question. But I think it's probably our general understanding, John, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if DEP certifies that the town's CWMP Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan meets the criteria, then we are likely in but we haven't exactly learned the mechanism. Do we send the plan to them? Do they ask us for it? So we're waiting for that sort of a little bit more information.
I did speak to Julian Sear today. He called me about an hour ago,
Oh, okay.
an hour and a half ago, and he said that they had a conference call with DEP, and they'll be briefing us, the town of Nantucket. And I said, when? He said he didn't know. He did say the CWMP will most likely qualify. They just have to go through a process. And then I asked him on timing, and I wasn't aware, but maybe you can confirm this. There's no action at town meeting needed for this, right? We could make this call.
Well, that was one of our initial questions because we were told a couple of different things
Yeah.
in November about that, and even right after it passed. So we were sort of waiting to get concurrence, but
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Sears said it didn't need town meeting approval,
Yep.
but
okay.
So I did have a discussion with Senator Sears, Chief of Staff, and on that question of whether it requires any town meeting approval, he said it was clearly the legislative intent that it would not require a town meeting vote. And he informed me that they are already putting together some technical amendments to the law, and he asked me whether I could provide some potential language that would clarify that. And as I said last week, it depends upon how you interpret the word town. Does that mean town meeting, or could the select board do it? And my suggestion was that it be as determined by the executive authority of the town, which would be the select board, and that would make it crystal clear. But he did tell me that the intent of the legislation was not to require a town meeting vote.
Did he define equitable distribution?
No. Okay. What we learned at the DOR conference on the day after our meeting last week was that the projects have to be SRF eligible, and that while this will ultimately be up to the management board, the current thinking is that when it requires an equitable distribution, it means over a period of time. So that the board would strive over some period of time to make sure that each town received an equitable distribution, and that is defined in the statute as in relation to the amount of the fee that is collected in each town. So that's going to be a very important process for the management board to determine. And of course, as I said last week, you will have a voting representative on that board, and the town manager will be a non-voting member.
I thought last week you talked about if we weren't excited about being on the being on this fund, we could take some preemptive action at town meeting. And are you now getting some guidance not to do that? In fact, that we could say, we'll do, should we be added? We want our year to start when we voted on it, not to be in it.
So, I can't be 100%, give you 100% assurance, but it seemed to me where this was going was that unless the town, meaning the select board, were to make a request to DEP for that determination, then the DEP would not make that determination, so you would never be in the fund in the first place.
Okay, so you're changing your guidance. You don't think we don't need any action, even that?
Well, as I said last week, you could go with a belt and suspenders approach and put an article on the warrant now to, in the event DEP makes that determination, to withdraw from the fund. That withdrawal would not be effective until March 28th, 2020. So you could do that as sort of a belt and suspenders. It's a little bit odd because you're not in the fund yet, but we could draft language that certainly would demonstrate the intent of the town meeting.
On that, when this was originally presented to us by it was stated that it would be our choice if we wanted to opt in. Now it's cloudy. If they're making amendments, I think that they should make an amendment to clarify that so that we as a town can decide if we want to opt in and not be forced into opting
Right,
in.
and that's what the language I provided to Senator Sears' office would do. It would require not only, it would also, and I'm not sure I mentioned this, it also would say that the request to DEP, that DEP would not act without a request from the chief executive authority
Okay,
of
you
the
didn't
town.
say that. That's helpful. Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry?
I didn't hear that earlier, so that's very
No,
helpful.
I neglected that part.
Okay.
So there were two
That's why I
amendments
asked
that
that.
I suggested, which would make it crystal clear that it would be up to the select board basically to initiate that process and also to designate when the town, when the fund would become effective in the town if DEP makes that determination. But I can't guarantee that those amendments will be made.
John, sorry, I just have a question. Is there a time frame on this opt-in, opt-out? As in, I would like to know a little bit more about the WIF, but say we took a couple weeks to understand more about some of the options. Is there a time frame for not giving our
Okay.
CWMP to
I
the
do,
DEP?
I do understand your question. So if the board wanted to wait longer before being committed, and if we get assurances that DEP will not make that determination automatically, it will have to be a request from the select board. There's no deadline in the act that requires you to make that request or that DEP give that determination at any particular time. So you could, I'm just going to make it up, you could wait until January 1st of 2020 and then make the request to DEP. And as soon as DEP makes that determination, if these amendments are in place, then it would be up to the select board to decide in what calendar quarter the tax would apply. The only other thing I would mention, of course, if you do want to now vote to withdraw from the fund, then you will not be eligible for any financial assistance until, well, let me rephrase that. Your withdrawal would not be effective until March 28th, 2020. So you would not be eligible for any funding from the fund if you withdraw. And if you vote later to go back in, then you have to wait 2 years before you're eligible for any financial assistance. So I think it depends upon how confident we are that DEP will not make that determination. I mean, Jason, you indicated that DEP would likely determine that it was a suitable equivalent plan. But the question is, will they make that determination without a request from the town? And what his chief of staff told me was they wanted to be sure to maintain local control over that decision because that is what the legislative intent was. I'm just reporting to you what he said to me.
Right. Okay.
The finance director has some additional assumptions that were run at the request of a couple of board members on the short-term rental. So Brian's going to take us through, I think, some additional information since last week or some additional projections.
Okay. After Brian goes through this, we'll have some questions and we'll open up to the public. The board's okay with that?
So we ran some additional projections as requested to actually complete different new calculations. This first one took the occupied rental properties down to 1,200 with a weekly rental amount of 6,000 and reduced the number of weeks to 8 weeks in total, which would generate at 6% an additional 3.4 million, which and at 5% 2.8 million. At 4%, 2.3 million, and then at 3%, 1.7. At 3%, we actually would fall below what we had actually received in total room revenue in fiscal 18. So I don't think that would actually be a viable option if these numbers came to actual fruition. I think we'd be looking at somewhere between 4 and 6% in this model here. if this was what we were going to base our estimates and projections on here. We then ran, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Did you did you canvass the real estate offices? Did they come
That's
visit?
Going to be the next one.
All right, beautiful.
That we have.
Those numbers were numbers I suggested.
Yes. So go to the one. Okay. So this was actually sent to me by somebody that works in real estate that canvassed all of the websites and did some extrapolations on how many of the properties on each website may be overlap. And they determined that there's approximately 1,355 potential rental properties based on the average that they're seeing of $8,333. And we reduced the number of weeks to 6 weeks to allow for any potential homeowners to occupy the properties and not rent them in some weeks during the summer. We could generate potentially, starting at 6%, $4 million in additional revenue. At 5%, it would projected to bring in 3.3, and at 4%, it would bring in 2.7, and at 3%, it would bring in $2,032,000. So all of those would essentially add to the 3.6 million, even reducing down to 3%. The only thing that I'm going to kind of make mention as the select board kind of navigates through this is that all of these estimates are exactly that, estimates, and I'm not entirely sure what the rental market is going to do based on, regardless of what local option that that you may choose to go with. So I'm concerned that no matter what happens, that we do get too close to the 3.6 million, which would present a little bit of a problem. So I would hope that we would potentially look at possibly 4% or a little higher too, because I'm not entirely sure which projections are going to be accurate when we do this. And if these numbers don't come to fruition and we've lowered the tax, we're lowering it across the board on the lodging establishments that are currently collecting it, and we would potentially, and I'm not saying that this will happen, but potentially run the risk of impacting us in a less than positive way, depending on the outcome of the short-term rentals being expanded.
Any questions for Brian? Do you have another model, or is this?
These are the two additional ones,
Okay.
other than what was discussed at last week.
Dawn?
I'll go. I said last week that I was comfortable with 4% with the unknown of the 2.75. I think that based on both of these projections, it's a surplus of between $1 million and $1.5 million. I mean, of course, they are estimates, but that gives me some confidence in the cushion so that we don't impact the general fund.
Right.
But I think that the community would really appreciate some reduction on this total tax. So,
Okay.
and I'd like to see if we do have a surplus that we discuss putting that money towards affordable housing or necessary infrastructure, or the year-round bus service potentially.
And the state tax is 5.75,
5.7.
5.7.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking about it from the optics, because I don't know if people will break it down between 5.7 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
So I think staying under 10 is a good number.
So it's 9.7.
Yeah, 9.7. So, but that's just to me. I wanted to stay under 10 for that global optic. So
I'm not particularly concerned about optics. I'm a little bit confounded by the idea of not looking at this as an opportunity that provides equitability. B&Bs and hotels are offering similar services. Single, short-term rentals. And I see Brian Sullivan here, who yesterday at the Affordable Housing Trust made some very articulate and succinct points about the short-term rental users being some of the highest demand users when it comes to things like landfill, when it comes to things like traffic and cars. And I've been doing a little research on what other Cape Towns are doing. they're going to be above 10%. They're going to be above 12%, most of them, because they have to adopt the 2.75. I think we're in a good position where we don't have to adopt the 2.75. We put it at 6. This isn't coming out of nowhere. I understand that there are business owners here that are concerned about it, but so is the Cape. I don't believe that this is going to have a significant impact on business that people are concerned about. If it does, we can come back to it, make it equitable for everyone, do it once, not mess around with going up and down. And if we decide to, if we either have to or decide to be a part of the Cape Water Fund and add the 2.75, then we can adjust it then. I really see this as an opportunity to address some of the issues that are driven by the peak summer demand, and that being waste, affordable housing, and traffic. So,
Thank you, Rita. I did a little research on my own. Provincetown, Brewster, Yarmouth, Barnstable are all at 6% local. And talking to our state representatives, they feel they're all just going to carry that right over. So my concern was if everybody's going down lower and we're a little higher, competitive markets, that would be a problem. So I'm for staying at 6, but I think there has to be some kind of restriction towards it. And I don't know, we talked a little bit about that today. Might have some questions for town council. Do we have to do that now? Maybe restrict it later? How does that work? So if we restrict it too much, does it get into the general fund? I think there's some discussion there. But if it can go towards housing and infrastructure or year-round bus service, I'm fine with the 6, and I'm not fine with 4.
and I know the Vineyard is working on, they are trying to figure out if they can put some specifically towards a housing fund as well. So I'm not sure if it will be possible, but there are other towns discussing.
And when I say I'm for the 6, not 4, that's not including the waterways fund. That would be different. We would lower it if we ever decided to do that.
So to address Rita's question, I guess it wasn't a question, it was more of a comment, but how would you restrict it? So there are really 2 ways you can do that. I mentioned last week that you can designate a minimum of 25% would go into a stabilization fund. The caveat there is to get it out of stabilization, it requires a 2/3 vote. But if you wanted to do that, you could do it at this upcoming town meeting. The other way you can do it, and what Provincetown has done, and they've had this in place for many years, is they have a special act that designates how the rooms tax will be allocated. It still requires an appropriation vote by town meeting, but it's by a majority vote. I'll be honest with you, the problem that they're running into right now is, this is a significant increase in revenue. Whether you're at 4% or you stay at 6%. And so depending upon how much money actually comes in, you could potentially find yourself actually accumulating too much money in a particular fund. And with a special act, we all know what it takes to amend that. If you do dedicate it to a stabilization fund, you cannot change that for 3 years. So you would be stuck with that for 3 years. So there's sort of pluses and minuses on both sides.
Thank you. Dawn?
I continue to feel that this 2.75 is a wild card. We don't have a definitive on whether we are going to have to pay it. And if that comes in and we haven't lowered this tax, I just think it's going to be too heavy of a hit. But also remember, we're not making the decision. We're deciding whether to put something on for town meeting so that the community can make the decision. And we heard a lot of testimony last week and almost took a vote, but held off to be able to call it out very specifically, to propose a
Jason
reduction that would then be voted on at town meeting, not by us.
Well, that's another question I have is, how do we set this up in an article that, or can it be moved? Is it out of the scope? Can someone say, let's bring it down to 0, and they vote for it? How does that going to work?
Well, of course, there's always a risk when you bring something to town meeting in terms of amendments from the floor. So if you, let's just say, put an article on the warrant to reduce the tax from 6 to 4%, like any other motion at town meeting, it would be potentially subject to an amendment. And the question is going to be, is that amendment within the scope of the warrant article? And that would be a judgment for the moderator to make. So somebody could certainly make an amendment to set it at 2% or to set it at 0%. And unless the moderator declares that to be outside the scope, it would proceed to the floor for a vote. So there is a risk of putting this on the warrant now due to the law of, I guess I would say, unintended consequences. Personally, and it's not my decision, it's the moderator, but given the sheer amount of money that's at stake here and the impact that such a reduction to zero would have on the town's operating budget, I would be inclined to advise the moderator that it's beyond the scope, but I can't assure you that that would be the ultimate ruling.
I do think there is a little risk. I did watch the meeting last week, and I heard everybody from the real estate industry say the potential, the gamble of the damages. I don't think it, and just in my opinion, I'm not in the industry, but it's going to be as bad. But I think the advantages of if we can restrict this and it can go to housing, I don't think there's enough money that we could put a housing to that's ever going to be too much. And so if we can make sure that it goes to that, not just the general fund, and then a different board comes in and a different town manager and finance director, and it doesn't go to our number one goal of our strategic plan, that affects everyone. I mean, high net individuals rent a lot of these homes. They need the services. They need the year-round community to be here. It needs to be stable. That's how I see it. Maybe that's flawed in some way, but I don't think it's, I don't see it. For me, it's not a money grab. It's to affect, change in the housing for the, the year-round community. It's a good opportunity.
I'll fill you. What I said last week was I wanted to sequence it, and if the numbers were right, I would like to. Last week I was saying I'd like to sequence it 2-2-2, like we did it when this original 5% came in 2010 or whatever it was. And so that was sort of my thinking. If it was revenue neutral, if it's not going to quite do that, then I probably would support 4%. But I think it's very difficult. I don't think I'd support 6 right now without knowing where it's going. Housing is a really important thing, and I spend a lot of my time and my money on it for my own business. But I need to see what we're going to do and make sure the money's used effectively. I don't want to give a blank check and not know, and be. I want to be certain that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. I agree with everything that Rita said, except that I think that it shouldn't be 6% right now, because we're potentially going into a downturn right now in the economy. If not this year, probably next year. All signs seem to be pointing that direction, and I think that it would be sort of tough to be doing that going into that situation. I also my own gut tells me that these numbers are, I don't know how many people are going to skirt the law or find ways around it. Right. So, I think, but I looked at just around the cliff when I was having an issue with my neighbors 20 years ago. The average rental up there was $15,000-$18,000 a week. If you had a swimming pool, it was $25,000. That was 20 years ago. So I have no idea where it is now. I haven't had the ability to do that. So I kind of think some of it is conservative, and I think we'd be okay even at a lower number. But to be safe, I'd support 4. So.
Are we okay to open it up to the public? Any comments from the board?
Just one other comment. I see safe being 6%, and if we need to adjust down, then as was pointed out yesterday by Brian, if we bring it down and then bring it back up, we've got everyone upset with us. I think we see how it goes and we bring it down. And pools, the energy consumption, the water quality issues, a lot of these short-term rentals that they're making more money on the short-term rentals because they have a pool, and pools are having a negative impact on it as well. Again, it's just the reality of it. It's not a judgment of it. These short-term rentals are costing the town, and we're not capturing that.
If we damage our tourism
yeah, hold on.
industry, it's going to hurt the town even more. And I don't see any point in leaving it where it is and then bringing it down. It's you do it now to soften the blow of this in so many people are feeling so hit right now between this tax coming in, an article that essentially tries to ban pools on this island, and the complete uncertainty in the economy with a shutdown government at the moment, that I think that we're really, not on great ground at the moment.
Jason?
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand this from a tax policy perspective. And I see this tax being disproportionately assigned to 1,355 property owners on Nantucket. If we were really concerned, and so in the past I've rented my house out that I live in. So now that I don't rent it out, should I be charged more because I'm, living there in the summertime? I mean, I think we can extrapolate this, to a point where it gets kind of silly. If we were really interested, and you've heard me speak to this several times, if we were interested in having a tax on the impact on the environment, if you will, or services of the town, we should be looking at what's been going on with the conversion of septics, Title V septic systems to IA systems. And I discussed with you in the past that the Board of Health had approved a month or so ago a 16-bedroom house in Nantucket that I think was going from a, 3-4 bedroom regular septic system to 16 bedrooms. Now, I'd argue that house in a pool is going to have a dramatic impact on the services and of the environment and service of the town. But if those folks don't rent that house out, then they're not going to pay anything. So I think from a tax, I have a concern about it from a tax policy that we are generating revenue from a very small number of people, 85% of whom are not represented because they can't vote. And I also have a concern about that. So, I'm very comfortable with the 4%, and I'd make a motion in that we adopt the 4% local property option for the short-term rental and add it to an article.
Is there a second for discussion?
I'll second it.
Rita Yidger.
I did, and I think I suppose making the motion without hearing from the public, I don't know if anyone had a comment, but I just wanted to understand your tax policy position, Jim, because for me, these are people that are renting their property. They're not living at their property. They're renting it as a source of income. So to me, that's a business. And this is similar to a sales tax. So when you sell something, a service or otherwise, or a good, there's a sales tax. So this is very different in my mind than taxing a property owner who isn't making an income from their property. So I don't understand the concern about a disproportionate burden on 1,300 properties. They're making money from renting out their properties. They're not living in them year-round, or even not renting them.
A quick question. Jim, do you want to hear from the public before we take a vote on this?
I would, because
Yeah.
I second it for discussion.
I think we'd like to hear from folks.
Yeah, quickly.
So we're going to hear from the public within our motion?
Sure, that's fine.
Under discussion, yeah.
Fine, okay. Anybody from the public like to speak on this? Yep.
Can I go back to the water protection fund tax, or is that?
John, can we go anywhere if we're inside a motion?
Why don't you move to table the motion?
Yeah, I move to or retract my second or table.
I'll
whichever.
withdraw my motion.
Okay, yes.
Just to try to get some clarity, when the DEP is certainly going to certify the town, correct? I mean, there's no,
I was told by Sears' office that it was most likely.
okay, most likely. We don't know when that's going to happen. I mean, we don't have any,
Or if it has to be requested.
well, does the town have to request it, or is the DEP just going to certify us?
We heard it's unclear, and that's why John's.
Okay.
If you heard earlier, John has
wild
been asked
card.
by the senator's office to put forward some language for amendments. He's done that, and then we'll just see what happens.
Okay, so, well, I guess the question is, when the DEP certifies that we are in the fund, when do we have to start collecting the tax? As real estate office?
On the first day of a calendar quarter as designated by the town. The amendment that I think may be put forward will remove the word town and say the chief executive authority of the town, which would be the select board. So if they did receive that certification, then it would be up to the select board to designate which calendar quarter it will take place. It cannot be, if there's a calendar quarter starting 30 days or less, it would have to wait until the following calendar quarter.
I guess that answers it. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a quick comment while someone else is coming down. I get nervous being in a group with 14 or whatever towns on the Cape who all look at us as the cash cow, as the rich, as the rich cousin that has all the money. I get very nervous that could be the view over there, and that our average home is so high and our assessed value is so low, and so equitable might mean a whole different thing to the other 13 voting members. So that's where I'm kind of hung up on that. We're getting along great right now with the Steamship Authority, but there were times where we weren't, and it was very difficult if we think back a little bit. So anyway.
That's a good point. Anybody else?
Yeah, my name is Brian Sullivan. I'll kind of clarify some of the comments that were made. I'm here as a kind of a three-party person, one a individual on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, a property taxpayer, and then a owner of a real estate business here on the island. I'm in support of the 6%, and that you maintain it at that level. I think that there is a handful of things to be considering. One, it's a level playing field across other resort communities in the Commonwealth. As you noted, the handful of other communities that are maintaining it at 6%. I see that you have an opportunity to generate revenue right now and maintain a level playing field across two constituencies, the hotels, lodging, bed and breakfast, and the real estate community. Whereas if you reduce the number now, then you look in the future to raise it, you're going to be battling two constituencies. I think it's important to note that the estimated number between 1,200 and 1,355 of homes that are renting is a small percentage of your overall property taxpayers. And while there are a larger portion of property taxpayers that are here and voting, whether they're non-voting or year-round residents living in their home who aren't renting, is a more significant figure than the 1,355. This tax is ultimately due from the homeowner. Through the transaction process, they're responsible to pay it, but ultimately it's a consumer-based luxury tax item, just like alcohol, tobacco, gasoline, sales tax. It's all going to get passed on to the consumer. The point that I made at the meeting the other day about this consumer is they are one of the highest demand users of our infrastructure and our resources when they are here. There are no 4-bedroom homes that rent for a week to 2 people. 4-bedroom homes rent to 8 people. They pull out air mattresses. There's 10. They fully fill a kitchen from the supermarket at the end of the week. The cleaners come in. They put all of those resources into the landfill. They bring multiple vehicles to the island. There's a high demand on the infrastructure, the roads. So this user is a greater demand user than the individual property owner that is receiving the rental income. So I think that that's an important thing to look at who this group is, and they currently have no fiscal responsibility to the community. I think that there's some fear that a small percentage of this group is worried about their income and where it's going to come to. I anecdotally heard a story of somebody who said, oh, I may have to rent my house year round. We worry about the consistency and fabric of our community and the people that are living here and their ability to maintain year-round housing. This situation, if it forces somebody from renting 4 to 5 weeks a year in the summer versus a winter seasonal rental and shift the whole thing to a year round, it creates a stronger fabric in our community by giving somebody safe, stable, and housing that they can afford to live in. So I think that these are the things that you should be considering when you're talking about the 2%, which is a small number in the spectrum of what the revenue generated. But if you use that money in the right way, bonding, and I'm not dictating how you use it, because Matt, I think that's an important thing for this board to decide, where is it going to go, infrastructure, affordable housing. There's a much greater return to the community to keep this 2% from 4 to 6. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brooke Moore. I'm the Vice Chair of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and I'm also a year-round landlord, a landlord to a year-round person. And to my mind, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in the year and a half that I've served, our biggest problem has been not a lack of ideas of how to address the housing problem on Nantucket, but a lack of funding. And I would hate for this board to shave, reduce, cut back on an opportunity to fund the initiatives that if you talk to people day in and day out on Nantucket about the dearth of supply at all income levels of housing for people who are moving multiple times, people who are shuffling multiple times a year, what we could do, and the process we're going through at the trust fund of devising plans to effectively and efficiently utilize funding like this, I favor the 6% because I think that we could put it to good use, both in terms of our environment with infrastructure and also toward housing to really alleviate a major stress point for a lot of our Nantucket families. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Anyone else?
One other thing that we should consider is, while I'm fairly confident that DOR is not going to let me, regardless of what you do, to whether we go to town meeting with a different number or not, I'm very confident that they will not allow me to project any increase. One thing that has not been thoroughly discussed or understood is if we actually reduce the number, or town meeting voted to reduce the number, what the actual implications are on the recap sheet to fiscal 20 in terms of whether they would actually make me reduce the budgeted number that I'm already projecting. And right now in next year's budget, we're projecting about 3.3 million, roughly thereabouts. We haven't had that's a conversation, truthfully, that we have not even entertained with them about if town meeting voted to reduce the number from 6 to 4, would DOR ultimately also require me to reduce my calculation in anticipation of that change in that reduction? And I don't know that they wouldn't possibly for setting the tax rate. So there is a potential that we could be forced to actually reduce our budget when we're setting the tax rate, which would also then create a hole that I would have to fill through other local estimated receipts or available levy capacity. So there's a lot of potential implications.
But that's a question you can ask and find the answer to.
I can certainly ask them when we see them this weekend.
So we've been discussing this for a month, and all of the unintended consequences I would have thought we would have fleshed out. So if that's true and you're that concerned about it, we should postpone the vote, because if you all need that information.
It'd be a third. It'd be a million.
It'd be about $1.1 million that we'd reduce it by potentially. Yeah.
Okay.
Ken Bogrant. I'm speaking individually, and not necessarily as representative of the Nantucket Association of Real Estate Brokers, but reflecting on information that I have received from most of the real estate offices. And that information is different from the position that Brian put forward, which is his view and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund's view, and we recognize that. I think that there's one misconception that needs to be addressed, and that is who is going to be hurt by this. We're talking about businesses getting hurt, but I think that what we're losing sight of is the fact that a lot of year-round people rent their homes in the summertime in order to be able to get some additional income and make ends meet. And these are the people that are renting to people at the lower end of the spectrum and the middle class that are coming to Nantucket, have come to Nantucket in the past. When you suddenly put a 10% tax on that situation, that has a pretty dramatic effect on these people. Let's assume that it's just a $3,000 a week rental. So a person has been saving, has that amount of money to come. It now becomes a $3,300 rental because it's an extra $300 on top of the original rent. But that's not all. Then there's an additional $50 he has to pay because the steamship has just raised the cost of getting his car over here. So what you're doing now is, in fact, you're going after the kind of people that have historically come to Nantucket, which have formed the part of the fabric of the community, and in fact, they're being given a message to stay away. And what you're then doing is you're taking money out of the pocket of the year-round people who look at this type of clientele as it being very important to them because they don't live in fancy houses, they don't have pools, they don't have $25,000 rentals. They have a $3,000 or $4,000 a week rental that really helps them be able to survive here on this island. So I think that you need to have a better understanding of who is going to be damaged by leaving it at 6% and who will benefit in terms of the overall community by reducing it to 4%. And I really urge you to really seriously think about that and adopt a suggestion of a number of your members to, in fact, bring it down from 6% to 4%. You can always go back up, but the fact is that what you're doing is, yeah, I know all of the other states have, in fact, have this kind of tax, but this hasn't happened before in Nantucket. And if you're going to look at another high-end community, the Hamptons doesn't have this kind of tax. Now, maybe we're comfortable with losing some of those people going to the Hamptons, but the fact of the matter is that you've got to think about the fact that the tourism business is a very critical part of the survival of all of the people in this community. And so if the tourists don't come and if they start to spend less, we're going to lose the fabric of the community and the people that are really critical to making this the great place it is to live. Thank you.
Sorry, Curtis, we have Lauren first.
Lauren Sinatra speaking as a private resident, 25 Allens Lane. I wasn't intending to speak, but I just want to thank you, Ken, because you really sum up our experience living here. I hear a lot about affordable housing, and I feel very fortunate to have purchased a home here several years ago, but it's not easy to make ends meet. We require and rely on short-term seasonal rentals, and it's difficult. We don't stack and pack our home. We're very selective. We choose 2 people if we can. We don't have a high-end home. And I really thank you, Ken, for really summarizing as much better what our situation is than I can. And I sincerely feel, and I've already experienced it, that every dollar that you raise in local taxes is coming out of our bottom line. And it is hard to live here for working class people, and we do rely upon these short-term rentals to afford to live here. A lot of us year-rounders, so I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Curtis?
I hear that. Curtis Barnes.
Lauren said I hear it all the time.
I have 4 year-round rentals, and I built my apartment on Surfside Road specifically so I could rent at a low rate. I rent a 4-bedroom, 3-bath apartment for $2,300 a month. I rent a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment for $1,500 a month. I have one cottage that I rent for $3,000 a week. I think what you're missing in the whole situation is the federal tax laws have now limited my ability to contribute to charity. And what I'm going to do to make up for the 8 weeks of $3,000 or $2,500 I'm going to have to charge people is I'm going to reduce the amount of money that I'm going to place to the hospital and the library and the community foundation, because I don't have enough money to keep my level of giving there. and also pay this tax on 1 out of 5 properties that's a short-term rental. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Christine Coletti. Thank you to Ken, too, because I really can't say it as eloquently as he did, but I just had a little bit of a problem where we think that the tourist is the enemy. We need them, and they need us. If they want to come to Nantucket, and I'm not too concerned about the 6% or 4%. It seems to be a tax that we are going to have to pay, and they're paying it on the Cape. But maybe they're going to decide to go to the Cape. Instead of having 2 weeks on Nantucket, maybe they're going to have 1 week on Nantucket, or maybe 0 weeks on Nantucket, just because it is more expensive to be here. So if we can keep tourism the way we want it to be, inviting to the people who want to come here, they're not all the beautiful people. They're just regular people like me who would like a vacation. And yes, they do impact the community, but I don't think it's always in a negative way. Like I said last week, they spend money here, they eat out, they shop in the Stop and Shop, they go to Cisco Brewers, they go to Matt's store, they go to the laundry. They spend money here because they're spending some time here. And, January is pretty quiet here. We need tourists to be able to make the rest of the year livable for all of us. And I do have a rental. It's supplementary income. I provide a really nice place for people to be able to enjoy a week, and they just love it. But maybe they'll go somewhere else I think we have to start treating the tourists like we really want them here. They're not an inconvenience, except for a short amount of time. We all breathe a sigh of relief when they go on the boat, but that's the price it is on Nantucket. Thank you.
I do love hearing that we love the tourists, because I hear so many people complain about the traffic and can't wait for the Connecticut license plates to leave. And I've never ever said that, because that is our bread and butter. So I thank you for all the public comments. Tucker?
Yeah, hi, Tucker Holland, the housing specialist for the town. I just think it's important for the board to be eyes wide open, obviously, when they're making any decision. I don't think it's a mystery to anyone on the board that the community, the board itself, town administration, et cetera, have worked very hard over recent years to try to establish a reliable funding stream to address an issue that we, as a community, have said is our #1 priority. Through no lack of effort on the part of many people, including Ken himself, the housing bank bill that we would like to see passed to the legislature it can't get off the speaker's desk due to the strong opposition of the Mass Association of Realtor Lobby. So, I don't know exactly what the right percentage is, but I do believe, as I think maybe the chair recognized, this is one of those things that's going to be a lot easier to go down at some point in the future than it will to go up. And if I'm not mistaken, if the board does nothing, it automatically will be 6%. If it introduces an article for a town meeting, then it gets discussed about whether it should go lower. We've heard kind of little bit competing arguments. In the one case, if we do this at 6%, we're going to be driving away the person who can barely afford the $3,000 rental. But on the other hand, we just heard that when they're here, they're going out to restaurants and buying things and so forth. And I think at each of those establishments, they're customarily paying a sales tax without questioning it. So, the $300 that they might have to come up with to make the rental work. Maybe that's one less dinner out. I don't know. But in the scheme of trying to address what is not only important to our year-round community, but to these folks who are visiting, and them having the folks that they expect to be here to staff all of the places that they like to visit and take advantage of when they're here. I just think we want to give this careful consideration before we give away something that we've really been trying to achieve for a few years.
Thank you, Tucker. Frank Spriggs said if we don't make our visitors feel welcome, that we're all in trouble. And so I put a lot of thought into this from the people who think this is going to drive tourism away or some unintended consequence. I have thought about that a lot. But the difference between a 6 and a 4% for a 3,000 week rental is $330 to $240, $250, right? So that spread, I don't think is it enough to impact this in a major negative way. Like the tax is coming. Like we're not going to go under 4. So that's just trying to give everybody my opinion on where I stand as we get closer to a vote.
I also think there is an argument to be made that if we can fund some of these our strategic goals, the idea is to make this an incredible island, to make it inviting, to make the roadways inviting. This isn't we're going to make it less inviting by taxing them more. My intention is to have the ability to fund these things that we're talking about that are a better landfill, a better waste situation, better roads, all those things. So I don't think it's one or the other.
I agree with Jim on the optics of it being under 10%. I just think it's a much softer blow. I think that there will be a surplus, a fairly significant surplus that can go towards housing. I still support the housing bank bill. I think that the transfer tax is a better way to get at this. And the CPC is supporting an additional substantial funding source for the trust fund. So this is certainly not being anything against putting the money towards affordable housing. And I think that ultimately we should propose an article that gives town meeting the chance to weigh in on this. There's obviously a lot of strong feelings about it. And whether we intend to vote for it or keep it or want it at the 6, I think that we should give the opportunity to the community.
So I'm going to go back and make my original motion, which was to put an article in changing the automatic 6% local option to 4%.
For a second.
Second.
Any discussion?
I'll discuss. I'm torn. Brian almost had me, and because he has a very compelling argument that I believe a lot of it. The problem I have is I'd like to see the housing. I'd like to see the housing plan. I'd like to see in writing how the big vision and how we're going to do it. And if we had that in place right now, I'd be right on board. And we don't. And it's been a year and a half. And I don't want to see us sort of nibbling around the edges and trying to do one thing here, one thing there, with no clear person in charge of a housing office and no staff and no ability to do that. And so I get worried. I get worried about that. And so it's sort of the devil is in the details. And I've been sort of at this long enough to know that things can drag on forever and just be nibbling away and not really solving it. And I think for the housing part, we have to look at a lot bigger. And so, so that I'm staying, I think I'm at the 4%, but, I would be willing to look next year or the year after and come back at it. I think I agree with Don. I think I think it will throw off more than we believe here. I think we'll have money for some of that. And if we do, I like stabilization funds, and I like knowing what we're doing with it. I don't want it to be something that just ends up funding staff at the same level so that we don't have to negotiate or other issues like that. I don't want it to go into the black hole. So I really think there's a lot of issues here that, I understand why government likes to get more money. I understand it makes their life easier, but at the same time, we have to be careful how we spend it. And so it's difficult. But so I vote in favor of 4%.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just have to clarify that the strategic plan for the Affordable Housing Trust wasn't even started 9 months ago. I think it would probably be a great time to maybe come to the next meeting, because there's been significant progress. There's been so many extra meetings, I can't even keep track of them, to keep this moving forward. There's been things coming from this board that have been thrown at the Affordable Housing Trust we've had to add to the agenda. And we are making incredible progress with having answers to everything that you have. But I think, in fairness, our own strategic plan, this board's strategic plan, has taken a lot longer, and it feels at this stage we're making less progress. So I do think it is a little bit unfair to characterize the Affordable Housing Trust are not having a plan in action. We're very close.
No, I understand that, and I don't mean it as a criticism. I know there's a ton of work being done, but I'm saying if I had that, because you and I have talked about this tons. It was one of my worries is we're not thinking big enough from the housing perspective. Our housing issue is huge, and it's going to take staff. It's going to take a real office. It's going to take the housing advocates all working together, and their various, using their various skill sets all to do the same thing. Not be in silos anymore. There's a lot of things that have to happen, and so if the plan does that, then I'll be the biggest cheerleader, and I want the money going there. But if it's going to be some of these other things, it's sort of, I think it may not be an efficient way to spend it. I think sometimes we don't spend it very efficiently. So anyway.
Jim.
Maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm going to go ahead. I won't say I'm offended, but I don't link the rate we are charging to a litmus test on support for affordable housing. We're going to get to a conversation about what these funds go for. We've heard earlier testimony that this is going to have an effect on tourism, and I think originally the hotel and motel taxes really went to support tourism. So we're going to, I know a portion of it has to go to affordable housing, but that's to me a wholly separate discussion, and so I'll leave it at that.
No, I agree. It makes sense. Okay. Are you ready for a vote? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those not in favor?
No.
No. So it passes 3-2. And then we'll have more questions from the DOR, from how are we going to, what can happen at town meeting floor? If there's a special town meeting, can we restrict it then? John?
As I said last week, you cannot amend your acceptance more than once in a 12-month period. So if town meeting votes yes on this, then you'd have to wait to the next annual town meeting before you could amend it again.
Right. Okay. That's good to know. All right. I think that's a big mistake, but hey,
I agree.
That's the board.
Yep.
It's a vote, 3-2.
I think
Libby?
we're too worried about optics, to be honest, and not worried about the content.
It's still going to go to town meeting. We're not deciding. It's not a foregone conclusion.
Are we still on this agenda item, Mr. Chairman? Because I'd be happy, we can all have a discussion about it.
Sure. Would you like to comment on my comment?
No, but I'd be happy to continue the conversation, just in general, if you want to.
Well, I just
I
made
don't
a
have
comment.
anything. I don't have anything else to say. But if I did, I thought the agenda item was over.
It's
the
over
vote.
when I say it's over.
The vote was taken, and we're ready to move on.
Yes. Thank you, Jim.
Excuse me, I'm going to go to the restroom.
Libby?
The next item is the noise bylaw amendment that the board requested. You didn't have the wording last week. We now have a draft article. Can you get to it? It's in the warrant, and it's on page. Hang on, let me get you the page. The I don't know the packet page, but the warrant page is 43.
What's the article number? Do you have a number?
It doesn't have a number
Oh.
yet. There we go. So the request I think, was to prohibit exterior construction noise from occurring between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. I
8 p.m. Okay.
think.
I think Dawn was,
Yeah.
she was kind of push this.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to wait for her to comment on
Okay,
it.
so
If
we're
we
going to
had,
come back to that
Yeah.
in a minute. Okay, the next kind of bunch of things have to do with capital items, which I neglected to include on your outline for last week, although none of these should really be overly new to you. These are going to be included in the Capital Program Committee's report, which is on your agenda for next week. But in the meantime, they are going to be recommending a number of debt exclusions. So they are listed here: landfill, capping and closing. We had a bit of discussion about this in the last couple of weeks. Orange Street bike path extension, Surfside area road reconstruction, that will include bike paths in those areas, and the public safety auxiliary building, which has all along been included in the project but had to be taken out because of cost. So those, I just wanted you to basically know about those, and you're going to learn more about them next week, but they weren't on your prior outline, is my point.
Dawn, we were talking about the noise extension. I wanted to wait for you to be here for that. Did you want to move that one, Libby, or do we need to talk about the landfill?
Well, we can go back to the noise if you want.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Don, I was just mentioning that the noise bylaw is in, but I need you all to take a look at it and see if it reflects what your intent was. And I think
Are we on?
I don't know what it is in the packet.
52. Yeah.
I'm not completely sure the time frame is what you were talking about. I think what you were saying is prohibit exterior construction, exterior, not interior, very early in the morning. So this prohibits between.
No, it was, my concern was actually at night. Because it's
10 o'clock
going to
now.
10 o'clock.
What would you want to make it?
That goes to 8.
It says 8 to
Oh,
7.
I'm sorry.
This
sorry.
is what we had talked about.
You're right. I got confused by the 7. Is
It
this
talks about when it can't do it. Usually it's when you can do it. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
so? Is this reflect what you want?
Yeah, and if there was a special project, someone can come to us for a waiver.
Makes sense
You
to
know,
me.
I didn't bring this up, but there's someone building a house on our street, several houses from me, and they're there till 10 o'clock at night, and it's affecting the people on Lion Street who are, some who get up early in the morning and they can't sleep at night, which I was surprised. So, and there've been one time when I called the police because they were over and the police came and whatever, but so it has an impact. Maybe it's because it's so quiet downtown this time of year, but it's I appreciate you thinking of it.
The power tools seem to be between the hours of 10 and 7. That's in new paragraph E.
Jim, are the ones you referencing online, is that indoor or outdoor?
Outdoor.
That's outdoor.
I think that should be 8
Okay.
and 7 as well. But I don't know how the rest of the board feels about it. I've just been getting a lot more noise complaints lately overall. And a lot of it has to do with power tools and construction.
And even though it's interior, they're not buttoned up. You're going to hear a lot,
Well, the problem is sometimes when interior work is going on, the saws are outside.
Right.
So that's the differentiation.
Or all the doors and windows are open.
Right, yeah, or there are no windows in
No
yet.
windows
so,
yet,
So,
yeah.
you're going to hear the power tools.
So there's going to be some enforcement difficulty, probably.
I think you'll have neighbors who will be interested in calling. So
I'm just reading this, and there's nothing about this that differentiates interior or exterior. It's any sound here that is audible more than 50 feet from the property line, regardless of where it's coming from, is prohibited. Just so you know, I mean, somebody can't work in their house if they're banging a hammer, and people can hear it 50 feet from the property line, which
if it's
is
mechanically,
everybody on a construction project.
But if it's mechanically powered,
It's just after 8 o'clock at night.
Well, when I say banging a hanger, I'm talking about they don't use hammers anymore.
Right.
They
Yeah.
use
that's a power tool.
yeah, power tools.
Power tool.
well, it says outdoors in residential areas.
I think.
But I guess what you're saying, Bill, is if it's,
It does say used outdoors.
Yeah.
yeah,
Look at paragraph C above.
But that is more specific to an actual construction project as opposed to, is that what I'm understanding? C is specific to a construction project versus E, which is just any domestic power tool outside.
I think so. Sorry, I just have not reviewed this
Yeah.
Well,
prior
you can,
to this.
You can review it a little more and think about it and make any changes for next week. But in the meantime, we'll change 10 to 8 in E. Yes?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, there are a couple of new things that came in today. You remember last week there was the possibility of a planning board article pertaining zoning, pertaining something to do with open space? That is off. They've decided not to ask for that. Mr. Glidden came in today with a request to reaffirm a non-binding sense of the I should say a sense of the meeting vote about the small mesh fishery issue that was on the warrant last year. So we'll add that if you're okay with it. And the finance director came in from a request from the airport with an amendment to the airport fuel revolver, which is not an article that was on there before, and it has to do with the use of the fuel revolver. So that, I don't know if somebody wants to explain that.
So when we made the change through the Modernization Act, the fuel revolver doesn't only allows for the sale of fuel, and they'd like it to be able to pay for the maintenance of the fuel farm out of it as well. So that would require an amendment to the bylaw for the use of the fund.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know if you want to go back to any of the debt exclusions. You are going to be talking about them more next week, but I wanted to make sure you knew that right at the moment they're in the kind of queue to get on.
I think we can go over them quickly, whatever you want to talk about.
Okay. Well, I mean, and again, you're going to be hearing more about them from Capcom next
Yep.
week, but there is landfill capping and closing, 14 million. It's a big number. It cannot be paid for within the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund. The Orange Street bike path extension, the board actually, this I think came both through from planning and town admin on behalf of the board because this was something that the board wanted to get at. The Surfside area road reconstruction, this is an ongoing phased project, and the cost to reconstruct the roads with bike paths is substantially more than what was initially estimated. And the public safety auxiliary building is also just an item that is needed, but the bid came in at too high of an amount with it. The appropriation was not enough to fund that, so we've had to fund it as a separate item. I think that's it. Right, Brian? Of the big debt exclusion items. There are going to be a series of capital outlays, which I did not list here, but you'll get those next week.
You'll be happy to know the Orange Street bike path, Capcom's looked at, of course, but Remain has funded a lot of the general surveying and conceptual plans. BPAC's looked at it over and over and over. So this isn't just a kind of a shot in the dark. And they're using leftover money for the initial design. For the town has as well, a little bit extra money allocated to that from a previous allocation. But it's been really vetted and looked at, and I think it's about as far ahead as it can be in something like that. And yeah.
Go ahead. You finished?
Yeah.
So at our meeting next week, the joint meeting, what are we looking for in terms of, is that for information? Are we expected, is that a recommendation from Capcom? Are we going to be voting on anything?
I think it gives the Capcom to explain their prioritizing and why of their bigger asks. And if we have any questions for them, how did they come to that conclusion?
And I think the action from you specifically is to endorse or not
right.
their
That's
recommendations for
this is just not just for information. This is our opportunity to endorse and or amend. So we'll have a presentation, and then as a board, we're going to have conversations about either the priority of something. Okay, so I just want to make sure we have that opportunity.
Okay, so those are all the major things that changed in the warrant. There are still some administrative items that we're working on, and there's a couple that we are now in discussions today. We're not going to put them on this warrant. The first item has to do with the regulations codification project and potential technical amendments in the town code, and we're just not ready to do that yet. We're going to hold off on that because there may be some additional changes in any event that are needed. The bylaw changes regarding the select board wording, that actually needs to wait until the home rule petition has actually passed. So that won't be on. And then we have a couple of special appropriations that had been discussed that I have had in on this outline for a while now. There's the item there that says ride share article. I think I've explained this before. All the towns in the state are getting back some funds from what's called ride share. It's a long, convoluted story, but we are getting around $23,000, and you are required to actually appropriate it annually. And so the whole thing here was, do we need a special article for it? No, we do not. We can include it in our capital article and appropriate it as needed for transportation projects. That's what we're planning to do. Parking Commission revolving fund. There has been some discussion about this with the paid parking group, but most recently we had a discussion as to whether or not we need to do this now. We do not even have a parking commission yet. We do not even have a paid parking program yet, nor do we have estimated revenue specifically. So our thought was, why don't we just wait on this until we actually know what we're doing with the parking commission? So if you're okay with that, we will not include an article this time. But it shouldn't be a big deal to pass when we're ready.
Only question on that. Well, we have a date on our, that we want this done. Do we want it done by? If we forego it for a year, are we still gonna make our date?
Yeah, because you're not. Whatever revenue comes in isn't going to be happening in fiscal 20.
I thought we were going to have a pilot this spring or summer of paid parking.
They were talking about testing the equipment.
So
Yeah, there may be a test of equipment, but I don't know that we're ready to actually collect revenue.
Not a pilot. Yeah, not
a
necessarily,
pilot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lastly, there was the Affordable Housing Trust article for the appropriation.
Which I actually did send you the warrant article late this afternoon from Bond Counsel. Yesterday, I went to the meeting of the CPC to discuss the possibility of them, A, of you putting a warrant article on, and B, of them agreeing to fund an annual commitment of a borrowing that would generate approximately $5 million in funding for Affordable Housing Trust Fund. CPC did vote affirm to recommend and support that, and vote to commit that funding on an annual basis. There was a lot of discussion about additional money that we, being the select board and the town administration, may recommend as an individual borrowing separate from that, even they wanted me to consider adding another debt exclusion for the original $3 million that you had voted. I'm going to leave that up to you whether you want to do that or not at this time, but they did ask me to bring that back. But I can say that they did vote to support an article, if you're so inclined, to put it on the warrant to authorize a borrowing of $5 million that would be paid back from CPC funds. And I did, during that conversation with them, I did tell them that when we were ready to permanently borrow the funds, I would come back to them and go over the amortization table so that they were fully involved in how long they were going to be committing the funds.
As the CPC rep, I was very supportive of this. We tried to find $3 million in the general fund, which was certainly not available this year. And this was a really clever way to get at the funding and actually increase the funding. It will be borrowed as there is something to spend it on, and it makes it's that real big chunk that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund needs to really get established and start doing some good.
And of the options that we had, it did seem to be the best option.
Good.
Ken Bogran, this time as chairman of the CPC. Basically, what we did was we took a look at the role of affordable housing with respect to the community's major issues, the select board's major issues, but also in our own responsibility as a committee to make a determination with respect to allocation of funds relative to the most important issues in the community. As you may be aware, this year we allocated $750,000 to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund out of the total amount of funds that we had available that come in through the surcharge for the CPC. What we did after discussions with Brian, we took a look at what was a reasonable number to anticipate to commit the CPC to commit to over a period of time that's going to be 10 to 15 years, because that's going to be the amount of length of time for the bond that is issued. And so we looked at the number with respect to what was the maximum amount of number that we could, in a comfortable way, agree to commit over this to this particular project. Now, from the point of view of the way that the committee works, we have to give 10% to affordable housing, 10% to the other two categories, and 5% for administration. So that's 35% that is committed by statute. The other 65% is then available for the committee to consider how to allocate based on the allocations or the requests that come in and the determination as to the community's most critical needs. So what we did was we took a look at the number, and if we did $5 million in today's time frame with respect to borrowing costs, that suggests an allocation of somewhere between $440,000 to $460,000 a year. That means that we would then be allocating basically effectively another 10% to affordable housing. It still means that the committee then has 55% of the funds still available to allocate to the other needs of the community, but it could in fact give additional funds to affordable housing. So there was a comfort level within the community, within our CPC, that by dedicating 20% of the funds that come in that were pretty much guaranteed because of the tax rate and the surcharge, that was a reasonable amount to commit future CPCs to having to honor, because we've done that in the past with respect to the funding for the bond for Sachem's Path and for the funding with respect to, what was the other one that we did, Brian?
The playing field.
The playing fields. All right. So we agreed to ask that this be put on a warrant article, because it can't be a citizens article because it's time passed for the citizens article, but we're asking the select board to put this forward on behalf of the CPC to in fact agree to have the voters approve this allocation of funds for this coming year and future years to fund a major chunk of dollars to be able to help get the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in a position where they in fact can start to do some significant things relative to land and other things that could become available. So we ask you really to support this and bring this forward on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you to everybody who worked on that. Brian and everyone else, CPC.
Do we need a motion to do that?
I think so.
Move approval of the
Second.
recommendation?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
So there's just another few things that just administratively I need to finish up. The finalization of the rescinding of the historical commission, and then complete the election warrant. So as you know, we've been doing one warrant with two things on it: the annual town meeting and the annual town election. And I just need to fill in all the annual town election items, the debt exclusions and all. So I'm sort of waiting till next week to see how it turns out.
I just had a question on that for the 2 articles on the roundabouts. I know one of them is not necessarily a fund, so there'd just be one ballot question
For that,
for both of those articles?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then just, you don't have to tell me this now, but sort of glance through the warrant if you would and see if you are okay with the way the articles are ordered. I always like you to let me know so that I don't hear at town meeting, why did you put this here? And I think that's it for now. You will, God willing, have a final draft warrant for your meeting next week, but it is not going to be in your packet before Monday.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that?
You want to put the swimming pool article at the end and make everyone sit through the whole meeting?
Somebody will just make a motion and move it up. Like we've done, right?
We did.
Did you move things?
You sort of, that was a conversation that we haven't come back to, is how to get more people to come to town meeting. I don't know if that's the way, but you did remind
You
me.
may be facetious, but I think we should, someone should think about the ordering of the articles to make sure that they're, quote, the important ones, I guess, the ones that they're early enough that people, because we know people get up and leave after certain articles are passed. So I'd hate to have a repeat of what happened in the fall for the lack of quorum.
Well, you don't need a quorum for an annual,
Oh, okay.
fortunately, but
Okay.
just for
All
a
right.
special.
But we still want the most
Okay,
participation
okay.
as possible.
Okay, next we've got a review of the fiscal 20 enterprise fund budgets. And it looks like we are starting with sewer.
Good evening, everyone. To try to be as efficient as possible, I don't know how you guys want to go through this, or do you have specific questions you want to start with, or?
David, I think they usually would like to hear right off the bat about any exceptions. So any specific increases to your budget for fiscal 20?
Okay. We had a couple of small increases, but we did have a couple of larger increases, as you will see. One of them with the 3 separate budgets that we manage, training and OSHA compliance and regulation stuff was our biggest ones. For each different organ object, the 66440 budget is the Surfside budget. That was the largest increase that we had. That was $100,000. Asking for an increase in that. That has to do with, as of effective March 2019, the town is now have to be compliant with OSHA. We just had an OSHA meeting yesterday. There's a lot to it, not just training, but PPE equipment and construction equipment and everything else like that. So there's a $100,000 increase in one org and 25 in the 2 orgs, for one for collections and one for the Sconset facility. I can go further in detail of those if you need. There was some other smaller ones, and there was some other stuff that we were moving around a little bit, taken from one that was a substantial balance and bringing it down to another one. Trying to think of some of the other ones that may pop up. Some of the increases that are also listed as far as materials, overtime, and stuff like that. A lot of the increases came out of last year's sewer force main failure. It opened up a lot of our eyes of where we were lax, and to get to a place where we are comfortable in being able to operate. God forbid anything was ever to happen like that again. At least we would have the resources in place to be able to function. One of the other increases in most of the different organ objects were there's a lot of safety, personal safety equipment, jackets, vests, hard hats, and stuff like that. This with the growing staff and the changing regulations again, there were some increases there. Fuel, utilities, there was some decreases and some increases. Hopefully we can do more decreasing over the time with some potential solar projects that may be coming up. We're doing a lot with National Grid as far as incentive programs. With the upgrades that we've gone through and the upgrades that we're continuing with pump stations, we're getting a lot of incentives back from National Grid. It's quite a project to go through. The process itself is quite intense, but there's really substantial rewards and incentives to go through changing out. It can be as simple as changing out a 100 horsepower pump with a much more efficient pump and a VFD controller, and there's substantial incentives from National Grid. But other than that, we seem to be right on track of where we're going. We're going to get a lot busier here shortly with the Richmond Group project coming online, and then the Shimo Nantucket Harbor project with almost nearly 500 connections will be coming online as well. So a busy year ahead of us. So any questions?
Just a general one. Do you have all your positions filled right now?
Currently, we do not. We have a couple ads out. We've done some interviews. Hopefully, with some of the more applicants that just came in, we should be able to be fully staffed, I hope, within the next month and a half, 2 months. So,
that's great.
But as it is now, we have a lot of new operators, so we have a lot of training going on, and a lot of safety training with our new compliance officer. So, bright future ahead of us, hopefully.
Any questions for David?
All right, thank you.
Good evening. Rob McNeil, DPW. So the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund, we're looking at a projected revenue drop. This is more of a conservative approach, and I'd like to predicate the presentation that the consultant, George Aronson, is part of this discussion and helps develop the budget between the finance director, myself. The revenue projection is based on the belief that we may be past the economic peak, and we want to be conservative on our anticipated income. That said, we do have a pretty substantial increase in expenses, which include the continuation of off-island tipping fees increasing, as well as freight costs. Right now, we're really focusing on minimizing or eliminating residuals from the composter, which ultimately is what gets landfilled. So the idea is to lengthen the life of the landfill, as we have just recently brought online the brand new line cell 3A. As Libby mentioned earlier, we'll be looking at fiscal 20 to begin capping of the old original landfill, the unlined cell, as well as the first lined landfill cell 2A and 2B. So 3A, the brand new, newly constructed lined cell, is the only one that's online. It just came online, and it has a lifespan of about 10 years. So anything we can to increase the life of that. by minimizing or eliminating the residuals from our composter. Also, we, starting in fiscal 20, will be self-funding our newly brought on solid waste recycling coordinator, Graham Durovich. As you remember, her salary was paid in full this year through a grant from Remain. Also, increase in handling of costs associated with the hazardous waste collection process, something that the board has supported. Obviously, trying to increase participation both from the residential as well as the commercial focus now to try to bring in and eliminate those hazards from the environment. Not going through each and every line item, but that's it in a nutshell. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
I'm good.
Comments?
Just, so is this your first full year budget? Of my recollection, last year you said that one had not been developed by you, or maybe.
No, that was the 18 budget, so 19 was mine.
Okay, great, thank you. Just looking for sandbags, so.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, not a lot of surprises here for fiscal 19 to fiscal 20. If you go line by line through things, most of the increases are incremental increases based on 3-year averages, trending, things like that. Not really any changes. The one big exception that I put out there is I requested an additional $170,000 in administration professional services. That's where we've been coding our travel nurses, which we used in 2018 between March and June. So we didn't see like a full year's expense of that, and we've continued to use them through 19. So in preparation for potentially having to still do that, I figured we better accommodate the need for an increase to cover those salaries. Now, on a good note, we are recently making headway in hiring permanent staff, which could decrease that. We had some ads run out in the American Nurses Association, and we actually got some RNs to apply, one of which we hired, not moving to the island until the end of February. And they're a new grad, which is okay. It's just their orientation would be extensively longer, so it's not an immediate fix. But that'll be one of our open positions that once she's up and running, we might not have to have 2 travelers, only 1. And we're probably going to be running the ad again in February, which hopefully if we can get another one, we might be able to not have to have travelers at some point. You know, but I mean, that's the goal. But as like everything else, especially with staffing, getting people to come over, it's kind of creeps along. It's not like being on the mainland where I can grab, have access to 130,000 nurses in the state of Massachusetts. It's a little bit, but I mean, we're doing things and we're making headway. It's not an immediate fix, like I said, but it's things that we're working in the future to grow the business. That's really the big thing that stood out. Everything else was, like I said, all incremental things based on averages.
So sometimes travel nurses contracts require us to provide housing. Does ours do that?
Yeah, well, we do have that ability over down on Old South Road, the condos that are there, the Richmond Great Point ones.
Okay.
The town is maintaining one for the use of town employee if need be. And right now, one of them, we have the one nurse we have there is in one of those bedrooms, and we have the ability to house another one if we need to. I do. The second traveler I'm working on actually is currently on island, so I don't believe that would be something we would have to do. I'm working through actually that process I'm working through included the signing of the contract that was on the agenda for tonight is for that travel agency, so that might be something that would work good. And again, there's always a hope that traveler comes over, likes it here, or she already lives here. She can just end up transferring on as in-house staff.
Anything else? Brian, do you have something?
I think that it's still important to note, I mean, I know that we've discussed this quite a few other times, but it's still important to note that this was, Ireland Home was one of the enterprise funds that did give us, that led to numerous discussions with DOR and setting this year's tax rate. And they have concern about whether we can meet the revenue number for 19. And if we can't, that would potentially, again, impact 20. We have already planned for an additional 500,000 to go into from the general fund into that subsidy, A, in the event that the revenue has to be changed dramatically, and B, we've, again, as we noted in the budget presentation, we've set aside 3.4 million of free cash up until town meeting to potentially close any issues that we run into based on our commitment to DOR to not have any revenue shortfalls in not only Ireland Home, but in the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund. So I do want to, while they're budget balanced right now in what the in these presentations, we still have a long way to go to before June, and if something changes dramatically in 19, it will definitely have an impact in fiscal 20. So I do want to make sure that stays in the forefront of all of our minds as we go through this process.
I still support an override.
I hear we're going to do Wanacommet first, and then we'll talk about Sconset after. The two major increases in two line items and expenses for Wanacommet in the upcoming budget are going to come out of our retained earnings. One is for inventory. We need to replace about 150 of our oldest water meters. The meters nowadays are almost throwaway items. There's no more working on them and repairing them. They start to lose their battery life after about 15 years and accuracy after about 20. So we need 160,000 in our inventory to start that program. And that'll be something that we'll be doing probably every 3 to 5 years. Not every year, but eventually try to not have any over 20 years old. The other line item with a big increase was professional services. 95,000 out of retained earnings would go into professional services to finalize our rate study, complete an asset management program that we want to use, and to also work with both David at Sewer and Rob at DPW in creating a GIS dashboard that's interactive for all of us to use and see at the same time. So if I go out and do some surveying, update our GIS, they'll be able to see it, and we'll all be working off the same database instead of separate databases. And as we move forward with projects together, that's going to be a very important tool. As far as revenues go for Wanacommet, we're showing a 4% increase just based off water use. We're actually predicting less new connections in 2020 for all the economic reasons people have talked about previously. But all in all, Wanacommet's sitting in a good place. And as David and Rob had mentioned, both safety is always a concern. Our budget item for safety has increased as well. So if there's any questions on Wanacommet. So for Sconset, we're showing about an 8% reduction in revenue. We've been working with Brian a lot in the finance department with this. About a year and a half ago, Brian and his team started noticing a decline in water use in Sconset. I think it's a combination of a house is remodeled, new appliances, new plumbing fixtures. People are being smarter with their water and water sensing out on the irrigation systems. So we've decreased that revenue. It seems to be on like a 4 to 5, 6% decline over the last few years. So we're going to go ahead and carry that forward. We cut back on expenses by doing a lot of stuff ourselves. One of our new hires is a few weeks away from being a licensed electrician. So some of our professional services on the pump maintenance and motor control maintenance can all be done in-house to save a substantial amount. Other than that, Sconset has no big changes, no big plans. It's only at 840 customers. It's a pretty steady. This time of year, I think we have maybe 100 active accounts. So it's almost a complete seasonal system.
I just have a question. Some of that decrease, I know a couple people who put in wells for irrigation. Is that a trend?
Yeah,
or-
that is starting to happen too. Back in 2010 was the last rate increase for Sconset, and it was substantial. It went up. It cost you $9 for 750 gallons of water in Sconset. Here in town, it's $4, so it's more than double in Sconset. I mean, you only have 840 customers. Back in the mid-2000s, I was up on the water tower, the old Sconset water tower, with the tank inspector, and he condemned it while we were on top. Said it has to come down. The railing, the ladder on top, was not even connected. So it had 50 or 60% rivet loss, so right away we were looking at a massive, as you know, when we went through it, a multi-million-dollar project. We haven't, in the commission, haven't dared to touch that rate because it is so high at $9 is up there. We have noticed customers driving wells. People do conserve because of that $9 rate. Always as part of a rate increase, you'll see a drop in usage. And that's, again, not necessarily a bad thing. It's just people are moving that way.
Yeah.
And we're trying not to raise that rate if we don't have to.
So our water rates vary by time of year?
No.
They don't?
No.
I thought they're not seasonally adjusted at all?
As part of this rate study, we're looking at a tiered system.
Okay.
That either do a time frame similar to the wastewater where it's seasonal, or to have a limit. If you pump over X amount of gallons, you bump up to the next rate.
Okay.
And we haven't seen that decrease and want to comment just because of the sheer growth.
We have, but I think it's harder to, we put in, since July 1st, so in this current fiscal year, we projected 102 new service connections. Since July 1st till today, we did one today, there's 56 new connections in the ground. So we're right on pace. We're going to hit that 100, I think. That's where we're going to get the increase in the 4% flow. I think because our customer base is pretty big and there's 8,000, it's much harder to see the decline. But even though we've added and added and added customers, our pumpage is not going up the way you think it would.
Okay.
It's going up, but not as much as you think it would.
Does that connect to David saying after the sewer infrastructure break, people started?
They did, and that's still holding true. Okay. So those numbers we first saw back almost a year ago today, they're still holding true. People are conserving, which is okay. We like that.
Right.
Yeah, it makes sense when you look at how many houses are being completely renovated and fixed. Everything's new. Everything's different. You know, the toilets use a third as much water, and all the heads are a lot less.
We see a drastic difference, and I mean, we've all driven around Sconset. There's been a lot of remodeling over the last 5 or 6 years in Sconset, so it helps.
Yeah, that's what I think is interesting, though, because there's also new houses that have been added. So the fact that there's still such a significant...
Yeah, if you looked at the real rate, I mean, for every new house and all the additions in the last 5 or 6, 7 years of new connections, we should be pumping a lot more water than we are. But I think the community in general is getting smarter about it.
About how they're doing it, yeah. No, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Anything else from Mark?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening. At the airport, our revenues are up significantly over last year by about $800 and some thousand. Over last year's budget, that's attributed primarily to additional land rentals as well as increase in existing rents, CPIs, and fair market value evaluations. And our expenses are down just slightly, about $50-some thousand. That's attributed primarily to essentially having a better history and knowledge of the various line items and refining our budgets. You will see in the expense side, though, there are a couple of significant increases in some line items. One is in maintenance and repair, and the primary driver for that is our taxiway Echo, which is in serious need of complete rehabilitation, but we're going to have to put some maintenance money into that for the next couple of years until we can get a capital grant to complete it. And the other is in some tools. Currently, our employees are utilizing their own tools, so we're going to supply them the tools that they need. our retained earnings, this is, by the way, is the first year, I've been here 6.5 years, this is the first time I get to present a budget without any reliance on retained earnings, which was a major goal of the airport. We do have a $400,000 transfer in from our passenger facility charge fund, which is a normal course of action and will continue over the years. That's just a transfer of money from one fund into the other to balance the budget. And our certified retained earnings at the end of last year, about $2.1 million.
Tom, one question. You said you had to dip into the maintenance fund for taxiway Echo. Is that connected to the special town meeting not having a quorum and not being able to get that appropriation, or is that?
That's part of it, but the real delay is we're going to have to go through a permitting process in order to get our capital grant from FAA too. So we're going to need the appropriation so that we can then go get the grant. So it is and isn't not, it's all part of that project, but it's going to be a major maintenance item for the next 2 years probably.
Any questions?
Which, just so you're aware, we just voted the other night to adjust our fees for air carriers and things to offset some of those costs too.
Anything else, Tom?
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Any other questions about the enterprise funds?
Not for me.
Okay, these are all going to proceed to FinCom. Valet parking for 2019. So as the board will recall, some months ago, we let you know that we had heard from National Grid that we weren't going to be able to utilize the Candle Street lot this coming summer for valet parking. So the request was figure out a way to have valet parking. So we spent quite a bit of time putting together a number of options. They're in your packet for where we could potentially do this. And we learned this week that actually we may be able to use the Candle Street lot this summer. So it is contingent, though, upon a specific request from the town in writing to them. So we'd be happy to take you through all these options that we worked on. Perhaps in the event that it doesn't work out, it does. Greg spoke with somebody from National Grid, and it seems positive. It seems like it probably will work out, but
So I'm confident that Greg will bring it across the finish line.
he'll bring it home. Okay, let's hope so.
No, and I mean, so I don't know if this had anything to do with it, but we made they said we weren't going to do it. We went out and figured out some other options and went back to them and said, can you please help us? And they're going to do it. I think it's great. I really appreciate it. But I don't think your effort was in vain at all. So
I sat in a couple of those meetings with Janet and Greg and maybe some other people and Erica, really brainstorming, because you brought that up, Jim. Like, let's find some other options. So we really digging in. We were kind of went to some crazy, ideas, and then brought it back to that. And it's good to have it as a backup and for next year. I mean, we've already done some of this work.
Yeah, we'll need to start thinking about future plans.
Mm-hmm. No, I think this is excellent to have. It is buying us a bit of time, but we will have to figure this out.
I thought it was interesting being part of this kind of brainstorming session, because there's not a lot of options. I mean, it's...
And they're sort of going to need to be broken up.
Right.
There's not an option that consolidates all the parking in one spot.
Yeah, let me rephrase that. There's not a lot of easy options.
Right.
Is that better description?
Whenever we survey people on what they want satellite lots. They're asking for something that doesn't exist on Nantucket because land is so valuable, there's nowhere to park cars. So they want an off-island solution here that doesn't exist because we don't have that possibility, which is, sort of, and doing this exercise kind of proves that, because you're looking for satellite lots in good locations. Where are they? It's interesting. I actually like option 3 of all of these, but
Yeah, that was the one I focused on as well.
it's sort of the easiest and
I think that option 3 doesn't solve the problem. The parking's too far away. It's too long of a wait. I think it would have to be a combination of taking some space in the town lot and expanding Broad Street. But I mean, I'm hoping that this becomes not as much of an issue if we can further negotiations with Harbor Place.
And also, well, hopefully we'll have implemented some of our paid parking that will ostensibly provide some efficiency, which will help with the valet parking.
And an incentive to take the bus or ride share or something else.
Yes.
Thank you, Greg and Janet and Erica, for all that work.
I think that's it for town admin's report.
Okay. Any select board reports, comments?
I have two. One is the Affordable Housing Trust met yesterday. The days are bleeding together, but it was yesterday, and we've sent back the draft of our strategic plan to Judy Barrett for really what will hopefully be one last final tweak, and then we'll be approving that. And what we've done now is picked each of the sections out and their individual agenda items for the next however many meetings. And yesterday we really focused a solid 2 hours on the operations and looking within that, improving relationships with other boards, communications, and really making sure that we have all the transparency we need in the financials. So there'll be more coming. And again, I encourage anyone to come to some of the next meetings. I think you'll get a feel for where we are. Third Tuesday of the month. Then we also had the third of our marijuana review committee meetings. So the first one they're happening fairly quickly, so this is all within the past week. The first one was very administrative. The second one, we looked at the format of the interview. We had about a week to go through the very big applications that we had. We also formulated some questions, and we separated them out into general questions that both applicants would be asked and then more specific questions. Where we are at now is that we have another meeting scheduled for this coming Tuesday. And we are post-interview, but what we will be using this meeting for is looking at the comparative criteria, seeing if we have all the information that we need from the applicants, and seeing if we need to request more before we can actually go through the comparative criteria. But I think regardless, we will be reviewing the criteria and one by one seeing if we have the information we need. So this process may take longer. There is a lot of information to digest and to really kind of put the pieces together and make sure that we're asking the right questions.
I just had a couple questions and a comment. Those books are like this thick.
I can't even carry both of them at the same time.
And I happened to watch the proceedings on, I think it was on Monday the 14th. Mm-hmm. And I had a question for you or Libby or John, but there was one applicant, as I understood it, did not demonstrate the same level, I guess, of site control as the other. And I was trying to understand why you decided to go ahead and give them the same standing as the other applicant.
John can help me address that. We went around and around about that, and in the end, the advice from town council was there is some evidence of site control that was provided, and while it may not be to our level of satisfaction at the committee level, it was deemed legally enough to get them into the process.
But we did ask them to submit more documentary evidence as to site control. And we're still looking at that particular issue. So there essentially was a requirement that they submit evidence of site control. Right. And they did submit some evidence. So we were not comfortable saying they were non-responsive and had to be rejected. The RFQ also allows the town to request additional information, and that's what we've done. And I'm suspecting next Tuesday the committee will most likely have additional information requests. I think the goal here is, because there were only 2 proposals, to not reject anyone out of hand, but to make sure that we have all the information we need so that the committee can do a proper evaluation. So if they had not submitted any evidence of site control, I think it would have been a different story. They did submit essentially a statement that there was a option to lease. I believe we now have a copy of the option, the actual signed option, as evidence of site control.
And also, just to follow up, I think the site control and also the business plan were 2 areas where it was sort of a balance of looking at the RFQ and how it was posed and whether or not we had made it absolutely clear that we had the information that we wanted. And I think some of this is part and parcel of going through the process the first time where, it's been difficult to try and make sure that we're asking the right questions and asking for the right information. So we do have more opportunity to make sure that we have all the answers that we need.
And I'd mentioned this to John, but yesterday there was the first acquisition of a Massachusetts retail marijuana establishment by a national corporation. And they celebrated this with people in suits taking marijuana. But so, we have a concern about keeping this effort local. And I think there's going to be huge consolidation. There may be a consolidation in this industry because of the level of potential revenue. And I just wonder how we're going to maintain our control over the transition and the conversion of
So the host community agreement has a fairly robust provision that requires approval by the select board. This is outside the licensing. You haven't drafted your licensing regulations, but in the host community agreement, it says that they cannot transfer that license without the approval of the select board in their sole discretion. But that, there's still an issue as to really what is the intention here, what is going to happen if somebody gets awarded the license, and are they just going to immediately turn around and try to transfer it and perhaps come to the board to get that approval. So one of the things that we're suggesting is that the committee considers some more targeted questions about exactly what their intent is. Do they have any kind of an option agreement with anybody? I want to make sure that they understand that provision in the host community agreement and whether their answers reflect a proper understanding of what that provision actually means. So we're going to be pursuing that with both applicants.
So, this may not be at all applicable, but I know in our discussion about this Concept Bluff preservation originally, we were of the opinion that the locals ZBA, the Concom's action would be preferential. We were able to keep those decision-making local, and we found out that the state basically trumped that, as I understand it. Is there a risk along those lines? Because these folks now have to go to the Cannabis Control Commission. Will that trump local efforts to maintain control? If they approve the conversion and we say no?
So if you didn't have a host community agreement, I would say that would certainly be a distinct possibility. But the law permits a host community agreement. We included one in the RFQ. We have a statement from both proposers that they have no objection to signing the RFQ. But if we want to find out exactly what their plans are and make sure everyone understands that that's the sole discretion of the select board, and whether or not we want to consider more robust provisions in the HCA, based upon what we understand to be the situation on the ground.
Okay, thanks.
I just had a question about, so we do have opportunity in the HCA to try and squeeze out any loopholes there might be for a transfer of a license.
Yes.
Are there things like a license can only be brought up for transfer within once every 3 years, or that sort of approach?
So that's what we want to, we want to look at for example, one of the questions you may want to ask the two applicants, are they willing to provide an assurance in the HCA that the license will not be transferred for X number of years? Understanding that even on day one or, day 1,000, it still requires the approval of the select board. And, oftentimes when you have those kinds of approval provisions, there's language that says such approval shall not be unreasonably withheld. Well, we didn't include that.
Oh, good. Okay.
It's in the board's sole discretion. And they have accepted those terms.
Thank you.
But a lot of this, isn't it depend on the corporate form and how they've set it up? Doesn't a lot of it, isn't there ways around it? Can't you have something holding it and then have shareholders in a separate situation and have them selling those things so the entity itself stays the same, but there's different ways.
So if you award an HCA and somebody comes to you and say, we want to transfer it, we can certainly require information. We want to, because this has become a very hot issue now, we want to make sure that the HCA has the kind of robust provisions that would get at exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
And Matt, are you asking? They're not even going to come ask.
They're not going to come ask us. What I'm saying is
the entity's going to stay the same.
The entity is the entity, and a lot of times, pick up, a law firm. It's owned by certain lawyers, and then some lawyers go and some stay, but it's still the same law firm. Not to pick on lawyers, but. It's that happens in a lot of businesses, and I'm wondering, in this case, how do we protect against that if we're trying to stop it?
Right. So that's why we're going to be working with the committee to make sure that we maintain that kind of control.
Right. Yeah. Every time there's a new lawyer retires and another person's brought on and they're an owner, it's sort of, are they going to be are they doing that kind of thing, and they just bring somebody else in? So it's harder, I think, than you might think.
I'm just wondering, and again, we will be talking about this more, but things along the lines of if there is a change in ownership or a transfer of power or financial benefit in a way that results in a shift without coming to the board, there's a revocation of the license or there's something like that. I'm not sure if that made sense, but...
Right. I don't have the... host community agreement in front of me, but I believe there's additional provisions in there that requires adherence to all of the provisions in the HCA. So we just need to make sure that, and it's not easy sometimes because sometimes people are one step or a half a step ahead of you, and that can be enough. So we are looking at that question very carefully.
And that's what I sort of want to say. If there's anything you do that we have not anticipated that results in a shift of a transfer of ownership, that would be included in that would be covered.
So, and I think what we want to do is make sure that they understand that provision, and we want to know from them, are they willing to sign an HCA with those kinds of enhanced provisions?
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe the license is where we have the most control.
Right, yeah.
We just don't issue that. That's true. Deciding they can change their entities all they want or keep it the same, but the license is, maybe we have more control. Thanks for asking those questions, Jim. That would be a real shame if we do all this work, the committee, and then it changes the day after.
Think about how much time we've invested.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Libby, I think this is...
This is my part-time job, and I'm not kidding.
So she could set up a little consulting firm on the side.
We talked earlier about housing and the transfer tax, and I don't know if people saw the Globe. There was an article, I think it was the 14th, or a few days ago. The Boston City Council's got they're considering high-end fees for housing. They're talking about a 6% tax for homes that transfer over $2 million, and they're talking about a flipping tax, which is 25% on homes that are sold within 2 years because of the overheated market and what's going on in Boston. So we're kind of not alone. They estimate it will raise 350 million, which is pretty interesting. So, for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, maybe if I'm not sure it's even going to get out of their council, and it's going to get, I'm sure it's going to get opposed more strongly than ours was, but maybe ours will look a little better now compared to that. So maybe that's something to be thinking about.
I read something that Dylan sent out. I thought it was over $1 million,
I think it was
not over 2.
Yeah, maybe I.
And it was going to be an option that anybody in the Commonwealth could sign onto it, maybe?
Well, you might have been. There was also, I think this was Boston City Council. I think there was one on $1 million coming out of Somerville, was doing something similar.
Yeah.
So I think it was a different town, but
I thought it was broadening it to cover all towns.
Yeah. Can I tell my gondola story? I'll do it quick.
Your what story?
Gondola story. So I took my son out to Colorado and dropped him off, because if I hadn't dropped him off, I think he'd still be upstairs playing Fortnite. So he's out there. And we stopped in Telluride, and it was very similar to what it was 28 years ago. There were no stoplights like there are in Aspen now. Aspen's a small city with turning lanes and buses and bus things, and it's, you feel it's a small city. And Telluride still feels the same. But Telluride has grown quite a bit, about 10 years, 15 years behind us. And one of the reasons they're the same is that they have, I said this last week, they targeted their main town, and a guy that was friends with the Giffords here started a land trust and bought a bunch of land so they couldn't do a suburban sprawl right down the highway. The other thing is they targeted development on the other side of the mountain in a European fashion. And it's with plazas and tall buildings and trophy homes along the golf club and along the ski runs. But it's, back then it was just starting. It's, they've got tons of buildings there now, 1,000 people year round on the far side of the mountain. But the interesting part is the traffic. I was there about a week before the peak, but the traffic was about the same as I remember it. And what they did is they copied Nantucket, and the guy who did it, who I bought the bagel company from, 20 years ago, the guy who did it, bought the land, did some of the stuff, was following Nantucket and saying, this is, Nantucket did that right, got a hold of land and bought it and preserved the town. But he said, okay, they didn't do the car thing right. How do we do it? And what they came up with is they've got a gondola. And since they've got two discrete towns, they have a gondola that goes up and over the mountain, and it's free. And it's run for like 15, 20 years. It's erased 41 million trips, passenger trips. 41 million that don't go up and down the mountain anymore, go back and forth to two places. The drunk driving and stuff that they used to have on those mountain roads are all gone. And so it got me thinking. I'm saying, okay, they've like looked at other communities, looked at us, and they've said, oh, here's our solution. And I sort of I'm posing to MPDC and to other people is, what is our gondola? We can't continue to think that we're going to be able to shuttle everybody on the single roads we have. And we heard tonight there were 100 people on water. There's 200 total that went in this year with 2.3 cars. There's 400 cars at peak. Maybe only 300 are really on the road at peak. But so we have to start thinking, what is our gondola? What is our transportation solution that is convenient and and not on the roads, and is going to get people, that people are going to want to use. And if we could find some way to hook up the airport to to Richmond, to Mid-Island, to downtown, maybe to jetties, if you could find some way to do that, we used to have a train. I don't know where we do that now, but what is it that is going to take that many people off the roads in the summertime? That's my gondola story. 41 million.
I like it, Matt. That shoots me over to January 31st. There's the Dreamland's doing the Nantucket 2030 and beyond. And I'll send something out to everybody on. Denise Cornell is going to moderate it. It's going to be a brief introduction kind of from us, 3 minutes of what we think of, the future of Nantucket. and then the next 45 minutes for kind of Q&A with everybody who's there. It's gonna be upstairs in the Studio Theater. We'll post it as a open meeting law. So I think it's gonna be really fun. It's Thursday the 31st, but I'll send something out because Denise would like to talk to everybody beforehand. And then I've been reading a lot of articles on website accessibility. In November, 50 universities were sued for their websites not being accessible. So if you, there's another one happening in other states, if you're blind, there's certain programs that can read the website and read it out to you. And so I reach out to Greg and RIT just to make sure that we're fully accessible when we are. With the new upgrade we had Civic Plus, we're 100% accessible.
Really? So you can hear it? If it's...
Yeah, it just, there's a program software that reads the words as you move
And
around.
we have
it.
access to that.
Yes. And
Nice.
so there's little things that if you know websites, PDFs will have like a PDF thing, like little annoying things to us. Like, why is that there? It's because it's accessible to all.
That's cool.
It's not just blind, it's hard of sight, anything.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's great. Yeah, excellent.
Does it enhance understanding
Yes.
of some of the things we read?
Will it make me more intelligent? Oh.
Anything else?
That's a long way away.
Can the packet be read to me?
Actually, Dawn, yes, it can. I haven't figured out someone, because I must have made a comment about having to read so much, and someone said you can get it read to you. There's some.
So if you're like in the car,
It would only take like 12 hours.
It would be great if you could choose Libby's voice or Greg's voice.
Yeah, can you guys do like an audiobook every week?
Why not? I'll have to revise my tone.
No, it'd be good to know what your tone is. Then we can decide if it's worth reading.
Yeah, well, no, that'll be the recommendation.
Yeah.
You'll know when she's reading whether she thinks it's the dumbest thing ever or not.
I don't need to listen. I don't need to listen to this. Just fast forward.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Was that everything?